Everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our intro to the Texas startup scene and AMA with Ted Kasten. My name is Jake O'Shea. I'm the director of platform here at Capital Factory, where I work with our portfolio companies, helping them connect to the resources that they need to succeed. One of those resources is our mentors, and Ted Kasten is one of the best. So really excited for our conversation with him today. Throughout today's event, we highly encourage everyone in the audience to ask questions in the chat, and we're going to get to them towards the end of the Q&A, or even in the middle of the Q&A if it kind of aligns with the conversation that we're having. As exciting as it would be for Ted and I to get up here and talk about fantasy football and football for an hour, we really want to hear some questions from you guys. So make sure to blow up that chat. And to get things started, let everyone here know where you guys are from and where you're tuning in from. Now we want to get started, but before we do, I want to bring up our CEO, Josh Baer, to share a little bit more about Capital Factory and what we do. Thanks for being here today, Josh.
Capital Factory is the center of gravity for entrepreneurs in Texas. Thousands of entrepreneurs, programmers, and designers gather day and night, in person and online, for meetups, classes, and co-working. And with our team spread across the state in Austin, Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio, we meet all the best entrepreneurs in Texas and introduce them to the people that they need to meet most: investors, customers, and talent to grow their team. We watch all of this happen so that we have this unique insight into the market and use that to invest in all the best companies through our Texas Fund. And we've been the most active early stage investor in Texas since 2010.
Really appreciate you taking the time to be here today. Everyone in the audience, as a reminder, Capital Factory has a variety of different resources that we designed to help you get plugged into the ecosystem here in Texas, whether you're just beginning or you're further along in the startup journey. Each month, we host this Ask Me Anything on the Texas startup scene, specifically so we can provide information on all these different resources and also additional information from around the state. Reminder, we're going to be taking questions from the audience in about 20 minutes. So please go ahead and put any questions that you might have about Texas, the startup ecosystem here, entrepreneurship, startups in general in the chat. And we're going to take a note, and then we will get to them in the end. So now let's jump into it. As I mentioned earlier, today we have the pleasure of hosting Ted Kasten today. Ted is a mentor at Capital Factory and has an extensive background in technology-focused corporate finance and both enterprise and consumer software. Ted spent 4 years in corporate finance, focusing on IPOs and M&A transactions for many successful technology-focused companies. And after business school, he followed his passion for software and made a career change and joined PeopleSoft, now known as Oracle, as one of their senior product managers, specifically in the business analytics group. And around 2004, Ted started a small software company focused on fantasy sports, which he still owns and operates to this day. And he bootstrapped that business to profitability after 3 lean years and has since partnered with almost every company in the industry. Those companies including ESPN, Yahoo, CBSSports, and many others. Ted continues to follow those principles of lean management with a hyper focus on solutions that are true to customer pain points today. He's been an advisor to numerous early stage fantasy sports companies and even invested in a few of them, including FanDuel. That was a great investment, Ted. So with that being said, I'd love to invite Ted up to the virtual stage.
Thanks, Jake. I appreciate the intro. Can you hear me okay, Jake? All right, there we go. Yeah, thanks for the intro. I feel like, going on the Jimmy Kimmel show, celebrities in the green room before they get announced, but
Interesting credit, but I appreciate it. Before we jump in today, I'm interested to hear a little bit from you about what you've got going on behind you. It looks like we've got some sports jerseys, a couple of different Packers helmets. Tell me a little bit about your memorabilia wall behind you.
Yeah, well, sports is definitely a passion of mine, and I've been working in fantasy sports for 16 or 17 years now, so it's part of my daily routine. But I grew up in Wisconsin, so I'm a diehard Packer fan, born and bred, a Packer shareholder, and have a lot of their memorabilia around here. Also, I grew up playing hockey, and that is, if you can see that, Jim Craig was the goalie of the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team. And he was one of my first sports heroes when I was young, because I loved playing hockey and goalie. And that was still is one of my greatest sports memories when they won the 1980 gold. Although I was only 10 years old, I didn't really know exactly what that meant at that point. But so that's what I've got behind me.
Ed, awesome. Very, very cool. So first, before we jump into some specific questions, bios are awesome, but it would be great to hear you talk a little bit more about your background and some of the meaningful pivot points or inflection points of your career that have gotten you to where you are today.
Yeah. I guess my career started out in finance. I worked in investment banking for tech-focused companies out in New York City, and did a lot of the IPOs and M&A deals. It was a very junior entry-level job, but the job taught me a lot of things. One, about successful business models, successful entrepreneurs and CEOs. It also, investment banking taught me how to work 70, 80, 90 hours a week, which is very helpful if you're going to be an entrepreneur. Pulling all-nighters is pretty common, and working nights and weekends is very common. So gave me a good work ethic after college. Can't show up hungover or sleep in on Tuesdays anymore. So loved investment banking, learned a lot. It wasn't my true passion after 4 years. I kind of knew I wanted to be more on the producer side than on a services business, where you watch other people be successful. I wanted to jump into a successful company myself, and I loved software. So to make the career transition, it's very hard. Typically, I went to business school for 2 years, and that was a great way to transition from investment banking, broaden my skill set. I focused a lot on marketing and other skills that I didn't have, from finance. So did investment banking for 2 years, and then switched over to software, moved out to San Francisco. Unfortunately, right as the bubble was bursting. Didn't get to go any launch parties, but went to a lot of pink slip parties. But joined PeopleSoft as a senior product manager there for a couple of years, which I really enjoyed. I love the day-to-day. I love being a product manager. I love being involved with software. I loved working with developers and marketers, and sort of owning your own product, even though I wasn't the founder or entrepreneur. You sort of, as a product manager, you sort of get to work with all facets of the business: marketing, development, finance. So that was a great way to learn about what I eventually would end up doing, starting a software business. But it was a great way to learn on somebody else's dollar. In a big company, you see a lot of ways to do it right. You see a lot of ways of how it could be better, or how it's not working. So that was really critical to what I'm doing now. Not only did I learn a lot about software development, but I made a lot of connections for developers and other people that I relied on when I started my own business. So that was a great transition. I moved to Austin about 7 years ago from Chicago. Moved here for a lot of reasons. One of the biggest reasons was the entrepreneurial community here. Always heard of Austin being a great tech town with South by and everything else going on down here. And finally moved down here 7 years ago, and immediately joined the Capital Factory. I think the first week I moved down here, I sat in on a Josh Baer Ask Me Anything meeting, and that's when he did it. He do it with 5 people at a time. I mean, it was really personable. He was great to meet, and obviously he's the center of everything here. So it was great to meet him off the bat. As well as the rest of the Capital Factory staff. And I office spaced out of there for a couple of years, and got to see a lot of other startups that were going on, some that I ended up mentoring in the fantasy sports space. But that was a great way to get introduced to Austin. I didn't know anybody when I moved here. So the Capital Factory and being in the office, which it's hard to do now, was just a great way to dive into the Austin tech community.
For you, you started out as an attendee of this event, and now we're bringing you back as one of the hosts. That's pretty cool. Yeah. When you moved down here, in addition to coming and becoming a member of Capital Factory and attending essentially what is this event, just back when you first moved here, what are some of the other best ways that you've found to really get connected and plugged into the Texas startup scene, or just the local entrepreneurship scene in general?
Yeah. I went to as many meetups as I could. Anything that I found of interest on, meetup.com or through the Capital Factory, I went to. First of all, I didn't know many people here, so I had a lot of free time on nights and stuff. So, but that was a great way to meet other people. I ended up working with some of the developers that I met. I was originally a business person, and I finally learned how to do coding myself, but I've always needed help. So I started going to like Node.js meetups, Microsoft. We use their Azure platform, so I'd go to Microsoft meetups, or they have full day events where they'll take you through their platform for free. And I'd go to those tech events, but I can not only learn about the technology and get up to speed on what the latest and greatest tools were, but also meet other developers who, could help me out with my projects and may be interested in, doing contract work or, helping me out with my fantasy sports projects. So that was a great way to network. Everything is virtual these days, which is great. It's easy, but when you're really, new to a city and a industry and doing something new, like, taking on entrepreneurship, whatever kind of startup you're doing, meeting people face to face is the best way to, get to know other entrepreneurs, see who else is out there, meet employees, people you could work with, people you like, learning from other people. I mean, nobody knows everything. So when you talk to other people who are in the startup community, you always learn something from them. So I really went to a ton of those meetups. South by Southwest was exhausting. I went to all those tech events and cocktail hours and met so many people there. That was just thrilling and exhausting at the same time. So really kind of dove in with both feet and just tried to be involved and network. And not every event I found a partner or investor or anything like that, but it was those add up, and eventually you're going to find somebody that you like and click with and can work with, and or an investor. Those are a lot of those are more natural ways to meet people. So really enjoyed doing that.
Out there and bumping elbows and trying to connect with as many people as possible.
Yeah.
Mentioned that you kind of taught yourself a little bit of development skills, and then based on your background, you clearly had the finance skills from your undergrad. Then you went to business school, learned more kind of sales marketing skills, then did some product management, and then now you mentioned you also learned some development skills as well. Which one of those do you think translated the most to when you decided to go and start your startup? Where kind of was the foundation that helped you really build up and start a business?
Yeah. I think the most important trait is more persistence and desire and passion than any specific functional skill set. Because no matter who you are, you're going to be missing a certain skill set. Nobody has everything. So if you're a business person looking for a tech person, or a tech person looking for business or marketing, obviously the more experience you have with each of those, the better. But if you're 20 or 30-year-old entrepreneur, you're usually very good at one thing, but you may not have expertise in other things. So, finding co-founders that complement you and don't have the exact skill set you have, but something else is super important. Nowadays, Capital Factory, so much tech stuff, software, that having that tech skill set in the founding team is almost mandatory at this point for those types of businesses. Hiring tech talent is very expensive. It's very hard to find. So having one of the founders be able to do some coding and development and really iterate on a product right now is so important. But then you also have to understand, how to make a profitable business. You have to understand how to market a product, especially if it's consumer facing. So, you really need to have a lot of skill sets. That's why I went from finance to business school to get a marketing background, to sort of help with my finance background. And I went to engineering school undergrad. So I always had a little bit of a technical interest. And then on nights and weekends, when I was at PeopleSoft, to learn how to develop an app, I just started coding in Microsoft Access and built a prototype of a bunch of different products, and a golf tracker. There was a CRM manager. There were a bunch of cool little apps that I built for myself or friends, and that sort of taught me application development a little bit in addition to my day job at PeopleSoft. But then I eventually developed a draft tool for fantasy sports that I wanted to use for myself, and started lending that to my friends who were in my league, got feedback from them. And over 2 years on nights and weekends during my free time, sort of built that up into a really good prototype that I eventually launched a business off of.
Seems like it's much more of a mindset than a skill set thing, especially based off of that kind of description. And weird small world coincidence here. Me and my friends are really into fantasy basketball, and my really good friend Rohan Dang, he went in and he's actually building his own version of a fantasy app, just using like Excel spreadsheets and things like that. But that'll help him optimize who he adds and drops each week, depending on the matchup. So I should definitely encourage him to keep at it, because who knows, it could end up being radically successful the way yours was.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, necessity is the mother of invention. So that's how a lot of these things get started. And it's pretty easy to build apps these days. So you can start with an Excel spreadsheet and, get the basics down there. The best way to get a product going is to iterate as fast as possible. And, that doesn't mean you have to build a full stack application. That might take you a year or two, or 2 or 3 people a year or two. If you get wireframes or Excel spreadsheet or PowerPoint, there are a bunch of no-code sites out there right now. If you can just get the bare minimum, the absolute critical piece, like the stats and the data to make start-sit decisions. If you can iterate on that and really get your algorithms and everything, all the details optimized for that one feature, and you can iterate over and over and over again, and you're really focusing on that one feature as opposed to trying to get a hosting site or, all the other things that go involved in building a full, commercial product. But at that stage, the ideation is and the ability to iterate fast is so important. So that's a great way to start.
Into the next question, which is, if let's say my friend, he's been dabbling in entrepreneurship, he's got kind of an MVP version of this product, and he feels like he has a good business model he can build around it. Where does he start from there?
Yeah. That's obviously a critical juncture. And I kind of have 2 thoughts. Traditionally, you hear a lot in the press that somebody in one industry comes up with an idea in a totally different industry that, they've got the outside view, so they know how to, change something and do something totally different. But when you actually go into that industry and you have no connections, you don't know anybody, you don't have developers to hire, you don't know marketing people that know the industry, it's really, really hard to do it that way. So, when I started, I was working at PeopleSoft. It was enterprise software. It had nothing to do with fantasy sports. So to get to know the fantasy sports industry, I did a bunch of Google searching and found a conference. There was a fantasy sports trade association, which I kind of laughed at. There was a trade association around fantasy sports, but they had a conference twice a year in Las Vegas. So I went for 3 days to a conference, and I had my prototype on my laptop and used that to talk to anybody and everybody that would, give me 5 minutes. I didn't know anybody at the conference. I didn't know if I was talking to a competitor or partner or somebody that didn't care. But going to those conferences and not being afraid to talk to anybody, even though you may look like a fool sometimes, was the best way for me to start, because that's where I got my first partnerships. I eventually got a partnership with CBS from those industry conferences, eventually got a partnership with ESPN. So those really helped me launch my business from, just a prototype, an idea in my room, to really a product that was getting out there, getting distribution, getting marketing, and becoming a decent startup.
Start talking to customers, and eventually you'll find someone that becomes your first customer, and then that can lead into a lot of other things. So when you first started that company, what are some of the resources that you didn't have that you wish you did have that would have made the whole thing make a little bit more sense or been a little bit easier?
Yeah. And another thing along the lines of the conference, I get this a lot in mentoring people. When you're at super early stage and you basically just have the idea, maybe you've got a prototype, but you're really passionate about it, you want to start it. A lot of people don't want to go to conferences or go to conferences and don't want to talk about their idea. And 99 times out of 100, that's a mistake. If just talking about your idea, if somebody can rip you off just with the elevator pitch, you're in trouble to begin with. But if you don't have the confidence that it's unique enough and valuable enough to talk to other people, then it's hard to find customers. It's hard to find partners. If you're new to that industry, maybe you don't know the competitors, and getting that knowledge out there and getting that immediate feedback is super critical. If you do have a unique product, you'll know about it, and if it's valuable, you know about it. The people at the conferences will say, "Wow, that's really cool. I want to try it out. I want to be a beta tester, a customer, or I could use that in my day-to-day job. I really need that. I can't find anybody else out there that's doing it." Or the controversy, or the other side of it, you talk to people and like, "Oh, there are 5 companies that are already doing that." And so, having the confidence to go to these conferences and talk to people about your idea early on is very important. If you're too afraid of people ripping it off, you're probably, not in good shape anyways. But as far as resources, I wish when I had mine, the first thing that people come up with is obviously money. And, if you had more money, it would make things easier. But in hindsight, I'm glad I bootstrapped mine. Because if I had more money, if I had, 250,000 or 500,000 or whatever that, seed round would be, in hindsight, I would have wasted it. I would have spent it on things that didn't work. I would have overspent on development. One of the things when I started and bootstrapping it, I worked at PeopleSoft. Obviously, there are tons of developers there. One of my good friends at PeopleSoft introduced me to a development company in India. And so through that connection, I got, a great warm introduction, somebody I could trust in India develop a commercial version of my product. So, I had that developer early on. They were doing an hourly rate. I've got, all sorts of feedback on offshore development now that I didn't know at the time, but you're focused on their hourly rate. It was at $18 an hour or $25 an hour, whatever. None of that really matters. But I had offshore development, and because I didn't have any money, I had to negotiate really hard. Every dollar, increase for the project, or I negotiated, and I think I put in $25,000 up front for the initial commercial version. And by the time the first commercial version was finished, I had to put another 25 in, because all software projects take twice as long and are twice as expensive, if not more. So my initial startup cost was 50,000, but I had to negotiate really hard to get that low of a price. If I had a ton of money in the bank, I would have been like, "All right, whatever it costs, I'll give you." And it would have probably cost me 100 or 150. And then also I probably would have built, more add-ons or more bells and whistles, which would have made the product more complicated. I would have built it before I got customer feedback. So a lot of those features probably wouldn't be useful and not worth the expense. So the fact that I didn't have much money really made me hyper focus on just, the one problem I was solving. And if I had more money, I would have wasted it. So I don't think more money really helps you at that stage. You really need customers and advisors at that stage to guide you, to let you know what the real customer pain points are, and who your potential competitors will be, or partners. Those are so much more important. And every year, the technology startups get easier and easier and lower cost to get going. So I think as far as resources, I built the prototype for 2 years on nights and weekends. I'd done a lot of research. I knew exactly who the competitors were. I knew who potential partners were. Hours and hours on Google trying to figure out who the competitors or partners were, if there was a product like mine on the market. So I spent, months and months researching that kind of stuff. So when I finally quit my job and started doing it full time, I really kind of already had all the resources, even though I hadn't raised money. I'd gone to industry conferences, so I had contacts in the industry. I had 3 companies that approached me after the conference that said, "Ted, we really like the software. We don't want to build it ourselves. Can we do a private label version?" And that was a huge turning point for me because at that point, businesses that had been around for a while came up to me and said, Ted, we know our customers are going to like it. We don't want to build it. Can we pay you to private label it? And at that point, I kind of knew that it was unique and valuable enough to launch as a startup. And at that point, I quit my job at PeopleSoft and started doing it full time. So I had partners. I already had not necessarily paying customers, but I had friends and friends of friends that were using the app the prototype that I built that were already giving me feedback. I already had 2 years of iterations on the product. So it was much further along than if I had just started with this piece of paper. So by the time I quit and jumped in both feet, I'd already had a lot of that stuff lined up, which I think is important for entrepreneurs. You got to wait as long as you can, get as much as you can done before you quit your job and have to raise money for a lot of different reasons.
To founders almost very, very frequently, especially nowadays, it seems like raising money and fundraising is like this panacea that cures all the problems with a startup. But I think what you pointed out that I find really interesting is that there's a lot to be said about having to bootstrap, and then the mindset that forces you to take in terms of finding what the most valuable feature is, iterating on it over and over again until it's something that your customers can't help but buy. And then that's going to lead to a lot more success long term, because eventually you will have customers or you will be able to go raise money. And then at that point, you've already got a super valuable product, and you can use it to actually just scale and grow that product as opposed to build it out in interesting. So
Yeah.
it also kind of brings me to another interesting question, which is that when it comes to fundraising, from your perspective, what's the right time to raise money? And what's the best way to go about it, right? Is it to immediately go to a VC and raise a couple of $1 million? Is it to start with kind of friends, family, or angels, or just kind of early backers that believe in you initially? So I guess two pieces to that question. One, what's the right time to go raise funding? When do you know that you're ready to go out and fundraise? And two, what's kind of your strategy or your advice for going about that?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously a very important question. And I think there's so much ego involved with raising money. I know when I was starting out with an entrepreneur, I want to raise $1 million at a $5 million valuation. So all of a sudden on paper, I'm worth, $4 million. There's a huge ego thing around that. And I think it's overblown because having too much money can be harmful to you. Selling too much of your business can really be harmful. Raising money from the wrong people at the wrong time can really shut down your business if you are unable to raise a second round. My best advice, something that I lived through and I see a lot of entrepreneurs go through, that when you're your first time entrepreneur, you've got an idea that you can't stop thinking about. It's driving you crazy. You want to quit your job and do it full time. The best way to finance the business is with your current salary, especially if you're non-technical and you have to hire technical people. You can try and go raise, $100,000, $200,000 from friends and family, which will be very difficult. It'll take you a long time. It'll take you a lot of time and effort to pitch people to do it. Or you can keep your salary for 3, 4, 5 months and use that to pay for a developer. And then wait till you're further along, wait till your product's been, got a prototype, you've got a beta version out, you've got some customers using it, got feedback, and then, wait as long as you can before you quit your job, because that salary is the best way to fund a new startup. Don't jump ship immediately and then spend 3 months trying to raise a couple $100,000, whereas you could have spent that 3 months building the product. I went through probably 2 rounds of trying to raise money when I was early on. And I was also doing the marketing, the business development. I wasn't doing any coding at that point, but all the new product features I had to come up with and scope out for the development team. And when I started to raise money, 80-90% of my time was spent on PowerPoints, networking, doing pitches, talking on the phone, following up, and you want every detail to be right. So you spend all night on a PowerPoint presentation that you send off that somebody looks at for 30 seconds. So I realized how much of a time sink it was and how long it would take me to raise money. And I'm like, you know what? I'm better off spending that time as a solo entrepreneur, better off spending that time on the product and getting business partners and getting customers. So, raising money is very difficult. Also, I saw a lot of my partners over probably the first 5 years when I was in fantasy sports. There were a lot of startups that came out. I met them at all these industry conferences. They became very good friends. Some of them were business partners. But I saw a couple of them raise money. And, when you're very early on and you provide projections to somebody to raise money, and I created my own projections that after a year or two of actual real, revenue, I looked back at my initial projections and it was laughable how bad they were, how off they were. Because I didn't know. You don't really know until you jump in and see how hard it is to get customers, how hard it is to get people to change their habits. So I had a couple of, friends that had started similar size, similar style businesses that raised money. Some of them got like public grants or stuff, if they lived in small towns, those, areas were trying to give out incentives for entrepreneurs to start their businesses in certain areas. Without fail, every single one of them had to shut down after 2 or 3 years because they'd sold 20 or 30 or 40% of their business at a valuation that they could never support or never achieve because their projections, were beyond optimistic. But you never really know. Obviously, entrepreneurs are overly optimistic. Otherwise, nobody would take the risk to start a business. But once you sell 30% of your company, especially to professional investors like seed stage investors, friends and family they'll give you as much leeway as you need. But if you go raise a seed round or an A round from professional investors, they're going to hold your feet to the fire. And if you don't grow your business at 30, 40, 50% or whatever you promise them, they're not going to invest in a second or third round. And then it's going to be impossible for you to find other people because, your original investors are disappointed and they wanted to get their money back. So they just had to, either close down the business because they didn't have any more funding or sell it for whatever they could sell it to give that cash back to the investors. So fantasy sports was, more of a niche business, more of a mom and pop lifestyle type industry. It did not support venture capital investments where people could get $25, $50 million acquisition prices or higher. So everybody that tried to raise money had to close down their business after 2 or 3 years. So I'm glad that in hindsight, I never spent the time to do that. Because once you do that, you kind of lose control of your business to a certain extent.
Funding always comes with strings attached, and sometimes it can create more problems than it solves.
Yeah.
Questions for you from me, and then we'll jump into audience questions. So everyone in the audience, go ahead and start populating that chat, asking questions for Ted, and we'll get to them here in a minute. My next question is, when it comes to etiquette, whether that's engaging with an advisor, an investor, or just a mentor, what are some classic mistakes that you think founders have made personally with you, or that you've made personally with some of your, investors, advisors, mentors?
Yeah. Super important. I think the most important thing from a mentor standpoint now is trust. I look at a lot of startups that have nothing to do with fantasy sports, other industries that I don't fully understand, people that I've never met before. So there are a lot of unknowns, which is fine. But if you don't trust the founder, nobody will ever invest in you if they don't trust you, because it's such a risky business to begin with at that stage. They've really got to trust that you're going to do the right thing. And if you start off on the wrong foot, first impressions are so important. If you blow that trust right away, you're never going to get very far. And one good example is I had a mentor hours meeting. It was a 30-minute conference call because it was during COVID, so it wasn't face to face. And there was one good thing that the founder did, look on my LinkedIn profile, looked on my AngelList profile, did take some time and effort to know what my background was, which is great. And that's super critical. If you're going to talk to a mentor, know what their industry's expertise is, know what they've done with their background. You may not understand it fully. And if you don't, be honest about it. Doesn't matter. Maybe you do understand it and you can have some small talk about it just to get familiar with the mentor. But this entrepreneur looked at what I had done in my past, which was fantasy sports, and immediately tried to twist it into what his startup was, which was selling tickets for beer in the future. And he tried to spin it into like, fantasy sports is the perfect background to help me with my ticketing system. And, I'm like, well, fantasy sports is software. It's a social game. It has nothing to do with tickets. It has nothing to do with events. So immediately off the bat, I was impressed that he looked at my LinkedIn profile, which doesn't take that much effort, but at least he did that. But he was so dishonest and came across as a used car salesman that the rest of the half an hour, I'm not going to trust anything this guy says. And sure enough, that sort of personality trait sort of played out over the next half an hour. Everything he said about his projections, business plan idea, it was, you couldn't trust any of it. So that was a horrible way to start out. If he had said, I understand fantasy sports and didn't say much more, at least that would have been a positive. All right, he's taken some effort to get to know who I am. All right, now let's hear about you. So I think trust is just, incredibly important at this stage. And that's why a lot of entrepreneurs, you go to friends and family first. Also, when you're raising money from professional investors, they're not going to invest in you day one unless you're a repeat founder with extraordinary results. They're going to get to know you, and they're going to wait 3 months, 6 months, a year before they actually write you a check. And you have to build that trust with them. They're hounded by hundreds of founders and opportunities. They're going to weed them out. And one of the ways they weed them out is if they believe or don't believe in the founder. So just make sure you're honest. It seems simple, but not everybody follows that rule.
Nice. It's, the dollars in someone, you need to trust them. And the only way to build trust is over time. And that's really, really great advice. So one final question, then we'll get to the questions from the audience. See some good ones coming in now. Keep those coming, everybody tuning in at home. One thing that is that an often under-discussed topic in startups and entrepreneurship in general is mental health. Can you speak a little bit to how important mental health is for founders and how it plays a role in having a successful business or a successful startup?
Yeah, I think that's so critical because when you're an entrepreneur, the most important thing in your life is your startup and the success of your company. And that's what your focus is. But ultimately, it's not. Your startup could fail and you could go on to another successful one. Most entrepreneurs fail many times before they hit success. So you've got to put things in perspective. Mental health and depression has been a huge stigma forever. I follow fantasy sports. I follow the NFL. There are a lot of celebrities, athletes, even the Olympics this year. A lot of these top tier athletes and celebrities are coming out saying, I've had depression. I've got to take time away. I've got to deal with my mental health. Even though I'm at the Olympics, it's not the most important thing. And I think entrepreneurs go through that a lot, and you read about it a lot. And I went through it when I started my business because when you start out, I was a solo entrepreneur and it became very socially isolating. I was trying to work 24/7. I wasn't interacting with other people because I wanted to spend all my time on work. And there were some factors that built into that. But, when you're an entrepreneur, you're working all the time. You're stressed all the time. It's not something you turn off at 5 o'clock when you put your laptop down and drive home. It's with you 24/7, and it really takes a toll. It won't happen in the first month. It won't happen in the second month. But 2 or 3 years down the road, if you're still in that kind of state, it takes its toll. And most people with depression don't know they have depression for about 2 years. You just think it's you. You just think it's, I'm doing a startup. It's very difficult. It's very stressful. But you got to understand the signs of when it gets too bad. And you've got to talk to somebody that, a counselor that can walk you through what you're experiencing and help you keep your mental health while you continue to do the startup. And there are a lot of things you can do to get yourself healthy and continue the startup. It's not one or the other. And I think that stigma around depression and mental health is starting to erode, which is great. The more people that talk about it, the easier it is for other people to talk about it. That's, I'm glad we're talking about on this call. If other people online are entrepreneurs, and you go through that, and all of a sudden you can't sleep, all the symptoms of depression, don't wait any longer. Talk to other entrepreneurs who have gone through it. Talk to friends, talk to a counselor, because it's easily addressable once you figure out what's going on. And if you hide it and try and just sort of be the tough guy or tough person and get you through it, that usually doesn't work. It usually makes it worse and lasts longer. So I think that's one thing that entrepreneurs really have to be aware of, especially first-time entrepreneurs, when you really don't know what you're going through. It's super exciting. It's enthralling. Most people want to do it their whole lives. And, you get to be 25 or 30 or 35 or however old, and you finally get a chance to really start your own business, and you want to go all in. Most entrepreneurs are overachievers. You want to go all in, and you want to be as successful, as you dreamt about. And one of also the challenges in entrepreneurship is you'll get a lot of negatives. You'll lose a lot of customers. You lose a lot of partners. Not everybody that you talk to is going to give you money. So you're constantly banging your head against negative feedback. So that, I think, contributes to depression a lot as well. Also, for overachievers, you do something great. You do get a big client or customer, or get an employee that you've really been chasing for a while. Those are great wins, and you should celebrate them. But people are like, all right, I'll celebrate it for 5 minutes, and then I'm going to go back and, start pounding my head against the wall and try and get more people. And so it's really hard to, you got to celebrate your victories and really appreciate them, because they are so important, and don't just focus on all the negatives. When I went to business school, there was an organizational behavior class where they said, just the human psyche, when you're giving feedback to other, if you're a manager and you're giving feedback to people who work for you, for every one negative thing you tell them, you have to tell them 7 positives, which is crazy. So you have to tell them 7 good things and 1 negative, and that becomes equal. If you give them 1 negative and 1 positive, they're only going to think about the negative. If you give them 3 or 4 positives, they're still just going to think about the negative. But you have to give them 7 positives. So that's really, that ratio is pretty high. And if you're an entrepreneur and just focusing on all the negatives, it takes its toll, and it's a grind. So you got to be aware of that, and take care of yourself, and make sure that the most important thing is you stay healthy. And I went through 2 or 3 startups before the one that finally took. I learned a ton from each of them. And entrepreneurship is a journey. It's not a one-time thing. And from every startup, you'll learn something that'll make you even better off for the next time around.
The hero's journey, which means that half of it is spent in the underworld dealing with a lot of, tough stuff. So thanks for shedding some light on that. Now I want to transition into some questions from the audience. We got some really great stuff here. Starting out, we've got a question that says, is it possible to find early hires, both technical and non-technical, without raising money? If so, how? We're talking like employees number 4 and 5. So it sounds like they've got kind of a core founding team and now trying to bring on some additional help. And then the follow-up to that is, should a startup join programs like capital factories, even if they don't want to raise a ton of money?
Yeah. The answer to both of those is yes and yes. Finding your first couple of employees without raising capital is a challenge, but it'll force you to focus on exactly what you need and nothing more. And the way to do that, ideally, when I'm looking at startups, if I see a couple of founders, like 3 or 4 guys or girls that came out of a successful business, it doesn't have to be Google or Facebook or Uber. It could be any successful business. But one person's a marketing guru, the other person's a development guru, the other, another person's a product manager or finance or something, and they've worked together in the past and they start a founding team. That's like the ideal founding team. So anybody that you work with and have experience on a 9-to-5 job, ideally they're not your best friend. Friends are not as honest with each other as coworkers when it comes to prioritizing work stuff. There are a lot of successful friends that become co-founders, but your co-founder and early employees really have to give you critical feedback. When I was searching for my first developers, I was going to always do the business side, so I always had a shortage of developers. Again, I went to all the developer networking conferences I could go to that were free. Microsoft held a bunch of them. These meetup.com stuff, there's stuff every night. I think there's Capital Factory has a Python meetup tonight. So if you want to meet technical resources, those are the places to go, because the people that are going to Python meetings from 7 to 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night are looking for something more than what they're getting from their day job. They're looking for, improving their skill set and a challenge. And those are the types of people that will work, a part-time job for you. They'll work nights and weekends on your project for a couple of months, give them a little bit of equity or a little bit of cash. And then if they are good and you get along with them and they like your working with you and believe in your vision, move them from contractors to the full-time employee. If you can work with them for 2 or 3 months on a contract basis, then if they don't work out, that's fine. It's much easier for you. It's much easier for them. But if they do work out, you've got a great person that you've already got a track record with, and you're more confident that you can work with them. Firing people's the worst part of entrepreneurship. So you really got to, especially number 4, number 5, and those early employees, you really got to make sure you get them right. You're not going to go on Indeed and find somebody tomorrow that has the skill set and desire and background that you're going to need to work with in the trenches. It takes a while, and you got to get to know these people. But if you do it right, it works out great. If you do it too quickly and are too rushed and don't do your due diligence, and you have to fire somebody after 3 months or 6 months that has a little bit of stock, or takes your project in the wrong direction, that can be devastating. So that was what was the second part?
Oh, the accelerator like Capital Factories. Yeah.
100%. Absolutely. I applied to Y Combinator, to Techstars, to a bunch of them. I think those programs are phenomenal. 1 or 2% of equity is nothing at that stage compared to getting access to mentors, investors, employees, partners, customers. It immediately gives you a stamp of approval. There's a lot of social proof in investing. If you're a total unknown, it's going to be harder for people to invest in you. If you're a Capital Factory Accelerator Program member, or you got into Y Combinator, you got this stamp of approval. That's more chips in your corner, the better. So I think those accelerator programs, especially for first-time entrepreneurs, especially for a founding team of 2 or 3 that need to meet, other potential employees or tech people, I think those accelerator programs are more than worth it.
Said too about finding the right employees. It reminds me of some advice that I get from Gordon Dougherty, our president at Capital Factory, that is focus on recruiting, not hiring, right? Really find the right people and recruit them to join the organization. Don't just cast a wide net and hire somebody, especially at those early stages. And with reference to Capital Factory, that's my job, right? We definitely do a lot of work helping companies raise money and connect with investors, but it's also about finding advisors and mentors and getting your next customers, hiring your next employees. We've got a job board, a talent network, a whole bunch of different resources that our portfolio companies get to plug into as part of being a Capital Factory. That it goes far beyond raising money, but we do help with that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And also, just to expand on that, having people on your side, every startup is missing a lot of things. You got a lot of holes to fill, customers, partners, employees, finance, etc. And if you can get an accelerator on your side, that fills a lot of holes. It gives you a great starting point, a proof point. And just like if you're raising money from venture capital, you want to go to the right VCs, not just any VC. You want to go to the VC that can help you hire people, can help you get partnerships in the industry, knows your industry, as opposed to just taking dumb money. So, anything you can do that have people expertise in your area, whether it's just general startups or, anything to give you that extra edge at that stage is absolutely critical.
our model, I'm obviously biased, but it's way better than an accelerator, right? There's no time limits on it. It's not like you do it for 6 months, you do a demo day, and then you go out into the world. We become your partners for the rest of the life cycle of your business. So one of my favorite things ever is seeing companies that came in at an early stage. We helped them put together a seed round of funding. Then we helped them hire their first initial hires. They put their head down. Now they're coming back up and we're helping them raise a Series A or land a partnership with a big corporate. So it's really so much more than kind of what you would traditionally think of as an accelerator. So now a couple more questions I want to get through before we have to hop off today. One from the audience is, what were some startup community resources, things like networking, information, et cetera, that you leaned on at the beginning of your journey? Sure was one of them. Conferences and meetups.
Yeah. Yeah, if you had to go to meetup.com, I think is still a great place to go find events around you. I think there was one of the resources, I don't know if they're still going because of COVID, but I think it was the Tech Map. There were a couple of startup communities in Austin that I dove into when I got here. I think it was the Tech Map. I don't know if they're still hosting events.
Austin Inno, a guy named Mark Nathan, who everyone knows, and he just throws a lot of great events and brings people out. See, Mark Nathan.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he's great. Yeah, and half of that is just showing up, and you show up to one event and you'll find out about 5 more. So get out to those events, even if they're not 100% pertinent. You can learn something from every event you go to.
Question today, and then we're going to hop off. Thanks to everyone who tuned in today. We've kind of touched on this a little bit, but could you shed some light, Ted, on how you went about finding and partnering with the right investors? And this might even be a little bit less relevant since you bootstrapped for so long, but how do you think about that for a startup that does need to go out and raise some funding?
Yeah, I think if you're a good startup and a good entrepreneur and a smart entrepreneur, you can try and find smart money, and you're going to try and get money from somebody who has expertise in your industry and really can provide value as a board member, can help you hire a co-founder or a CTO or a chief marketing officer. And, sometimes those early stage seed investors are harder to get their capital. But, the smarter money you can get that can really help you beyond just the cash, I think is so important. And there are other ways to get cash into your business. You can private label your product to a big customer that'll pays you cash up front for it, something like that. Once you sell equity and you're intertwined with them for the rest of your life or the rest of the company's life, you really got to find people that are going to help you long term. And that takes a long time. And that's why I sort of did it for a couple of months, realized I was spending 80% of my time doing it. It takes a while, and that's why honesty is important, because you have to cultivate these relationships. People have to trust you. You have to trust them. There's a lot of conflict between VCs and founders down the road sometimes. FanDuel, I invested in FanDuel. Founders there were raising money at $2 billion, and they all had common stock. They sold the business for $500 million, and they didn't make a nickel. And there was a lot of conflict there between their founders and investors. The investors that had preferred stock, because that's the way VCs do it. Founders get common. If you raise money to big valuation and then sell it for less, there's zero for the common shareholders. The investors get their money back first, and that's how it works. So you got to trust them too. And that's why I think, being part of the Capital Factory, you get immediate access to some of the top seed investors here in Austin, Live Oak, Silver Lake, et cetera. And you get a warm introduction, and they'll return your phone call. If somebody has a piece of equity in your business, they're going to return your phone call. They're going to return your email immediately. You'll become a top priority for them, and they'll help as many ways as they can. So to have, the Capital Factory team that is the center of, entrepreneurship in Austin and now expanding throughout Texas, they can make intros to almost anybody in Texas for a lot of different reasons and a lot of different areas. And same can, goes with the good seed stage investors and good VC investors. And that's where they really add a lot of value beyond just capital.
Let's plug for Capital Factory here. We're designed to provide a lot of that value before we invest. That's our investment strategy. We want you to come into our portfolio. We're going to help you. We're going to connect you with investors, customers, employees. And then when you raise a round of funding, your next round of funding, that's when we would come in and invest alongside you after we've already provided a lot of extra value. So last question, because I know we're up with time, but this is a really great question. Then we'll wrap up. So just real quick, Ted, for a marketplace startup, how should we go about acquiring our first new customers when a competitor exists in the same space? Do we build a product and compete, or kind of what's your advice here?
Marketplaces are probably the hardest startups to start. If it's a two-sided marketplace, they're incredibly difficult. And if there's already somebody in that space, maybe it's too late, maybe it's not. If they're better funded, if they're already further along, and if you're trying to raise $1 million and they're raising 10 million easily, it's really hard. Marketplaces, eBay is still around. There are a lot of competitors to eBay, but they were the first and the biggest. And even like FanDuel is sort of a marketplace where you've got all sorts of competitors coming to that platform to play against each other. And once they raised a ton of money, they beat out all of their competitors. The competitors went out of business, and you were left with DraftKings and FanDuel. So marketplaces are really tough. I've never invested in one. I've never started one. So I fortunately don't have any specific advice for that. One thing I will say about features and functionality and competition, if you do have a first product to market and you're sort of a leader in that space, a lot of people will follow you and knock you off, especially on web applications. It's so easy to knock people off. But if you're truly the leader in there and you've got better ideas, and you're moving faster and you're more agile, and the features that they're knocking off are features that you built a year ago or thought about 2 years ago, you're always going to be ahead of them. So, if there's a competitor that just launched in front of you, but is missing some key features, or you don't believe they've got it right, you think you've got the better features, go for it and iterate as fast as you can. And, for marketplaces, you may have to seed the market. You may have to, give things away for free, let people, cut your commission 100%, or even pay people to get on your platform. If you need one side to get the other, you've got to seed the market, and it's not going to come for free. It's not going to come easily. But for the dual-sided marketplaces, you got to have both sides. Otherwise, it's not valuable to either. So, one thing that people struggle with the most in forecasting plans is customer acquisition. Customer acquisition, marketing and budget is really expensive, especially for early businesses. You can spend $100,000 developing a product, but if nobody uses it, doesn't matter. You've got to have a couple $100,000 to get those initial customers and get traction. So if you've got a dual marketplace, you probably got to spend even more than that. You got to be prepared to spend a lot of money to get both sides, like Uber. I mean, those guys raised billions of dollars. Dual side marketplaces are really tough. If you can get that niche and control it, you're in great shape. But those are pretty challenging businesses to do.
Time we have for today. Ted, thanks so much for being here. This was a really awesome conversation. I learned a lot. Hopefully the audience did as well. So thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. I really enjoyed it, and hopefully it was helpful. I'm always available for mentor hours at Capital Factory, or shoot me an email, follow up. Always happy to help people out. So I think being in Austin is an exciting time right now. A lot of great entrepreneurs and tech businesses moving here. So it's a great place to be if you're doing anything startup related. The environment, the ecosystem here is fantastic.
And Ted, everyone in the audience, my name is Jake. I'm the director of platform here at Capital Factory. If you want to get in touch with me, follow me on Twitter. I'm at Jake O'Shea. There's an underscore in there, Jake_O'Shea. But yeah, thanks so much for everyone for tuning in. If you're interested in learning more about Capital Factory, reach out to me on Twitter. Shoot me an email. My email is just my first and last name at capitalfactory.com. Would love to hear from some of you guys. Everyone have a great day. Bye now.